Today, I'm with the man, the legend, Dr. Sean Baker. He's been eating pretty much only steak for 8 years, I believe. For those who don't know, Dr. Baker was the guy that started the carnivore movement in the US back in 2017. Dr. Baker, thanks for being here. Can you please introduce yourself to the Brazilian public that don't know you?
Yeah, well, first of all, and as I said to the Brazilian public, bom dia. I don't have my Portuguese is not very good. I know a few words, but thanks for having me. Yeah, my name is Dr. Sean Baker. I am by background training an orthopedic surgeon. I started to notice that my patients, if I could get them on a low carb and a ketogenic diet, often their joint pain would go away, which was the first sort of interesting thing that I had noticed. I myself went on a carnivore diet back in 2016. I wrote a book about it, published it in 2019. I was on Joe Rogan's podcast in 2017, talking about this. And since that time, we have seen tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people take on the carnivore diet. And very often they see tremendous improvements in health, and often many of them put diseases in remission. They come off all medications, which is really what's my passion as a physician is about, is trying to cure disease if possible. I have, as you mentioned, I've been doing a diet that pretty much consists of primarily just steak for about 9 years now. And I am now almost 60 years of age and still performing at a very high level. I mean, I'm out there sprinting and dunking basketballs and lifting heavy weights and, setting world records in rowing. And so I have managed to show that this can be something that can be used at all levels of health and performance. But again, my main focus has always been on the people that are sick and trying to get them better, because that's what it's ultimately about. And whatever diet you prefer, it's up to you. But I'm here to tell you that meat, and particularly red meat, is generally quite healthy. And despite the fact that we've been told to avoid it and that it's bad for us, that clearly is not the case.
Yep, 100%. So you pretty much been eating steak for 9 years, feeling great, breaking records. But coming back 8 years, 9 years, what made you realize that only eating meat made sense from a nutrition standpoint? Because not many people talked about it back then, right?
Yeah, so when I first came across a group of people doing this only all meat diet, I thought it was quite crazy, like everybody does. I mean, it's just, the questions would be, well, what about things like scurvy? What about, vegetables and fiber and what about all the saturated fat? On paper, it did not make sense, because we've been trained to think that red meat is bad for us and that vegetables and things like that are essential for health. But I was open-minded enough to realize that, people were thriving in many cases, on low carbohydrate diets. And I was less convinced about the dangers of saturated fat as other people seem to think so. So I was open-minded enough to at least try it. And once I tried it, and I tried it for 30 days back in, like I said, 2016, I was really blown away by how much better I actually felt. And, that's important. How you feel is very important in many cases. I mean, that's why we do many things, so that we can feel better. As I looked into it more and more and did more of the research and looked at what was known both in medical knowledge and biochemistry and human physiology and human anthropology and evolutionary science, it's starting to make sense that, humans are and can be very carnivorous. And at periods of times, we were almost exclusively carnivorous for certain segments of our evolutionary history. And that, coupled with the fact that people are clearly getting better. I mean, putting long-term, lifelong diseases into full remission, sort of gives more and more credence to the fact that meat is, in fact, particularly red meat, I think is honestly a superfood, if we want to use that term. I know that's used for a lot of things, but honestly, just from the sense of what do we need to consume as a human being to acquire nutrients. And, basically what we need are basically amino acids. We need essential fats. We need a source of energy, which could either come from carbohydrates or fat. We need some vitamins, minerals, and arguably water. And beyond that, we don't really need anything else from our nutrition. And meat literally fits all those bills, and very nicely. I mean, this is something that you could live on indefinitely with nothing else. And I see people that do that quite frequently. I mean, when it comes down to what do we need basically. And we consume a lot of things that we don't need, obviously, in the modern diet. The modern diet is horrible, probably the same thing in Brazil as it is in the US, and getting worse. So, yeah, so it's interesting to see how this has played out.
I believe so as well. It's pretty interesting to hear from a lot of doctors all around the world that when people join a carnivorous diet, and I've interviewed a lot of doctors in Brazil as well, and they say the same thing. My patients, they go in a carnivore diet and they feel better being a psychiatrist or just a doctor that deals with autoimmune diseases or something like that. What kind of diseases do you see in your practice there in the US that people are getting better from?
Yeah,
joining a
gosh.
carnivore diet.
Yeah, I mean, I could literally list hundreds of different conditions, but in general terms, we see metabolic diseases like diabetes, obesity, high blood pressure, the general metabolic syndrome resolve quite commonly. We see a lot of autoimmunity, and these would be things like Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, psoriasis, rheumatoid arthritis, Graves' disease, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, myasthenia gravis, multiple sclerosis. Those things often get better. Now, I want to caveat, not everybody gets 100% better. Many people do. In fact, the majority of them get significantly better. But there are some people where, it takes more than just diet to improve that. We see just in general inflammatory conditions, things like just general arthritis, the old osteoarthritis often improves. We see a whole host of mental health conditions get better, everything from depression to bipolar disorder to anxiety to schizophrenia to schizoaffective disorder to PTSD to ADHD. All of those things often improve significantly. People's moods in general just improve generally, provided they're eating enough, and they're eating enough fat, and they're eating enough calories. Generally, we see a significant improvement in mental health disorders. I've seen even weird genetic disorders get better. Things like there's a disease called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is a genetic connective tissue disorder where people often have very hypermobile joints. Their joints sublux or they dislocate, and that stops happening when they go carnivore, which is quite baffling to me. I still haven't figured out the mechanism by which that works, but it does seem to happen. So I could list, literally, I've done that before. I've alphabetized from A to Z all the diseases that I've seen get better on this diet. It's pretty amazing.
Is that in your book, or is that in a website that we can get a hold of? Because I would love to translate that and give it to the audience.
Yeah, my book catalogs a lot of this. Now, obviously, that book I published in 2019, and so in the intervening 6 years, I've seen a lot more, and more to come. And there's been now scientific papers published, case series on inflammatory bowel disease, mental health disorders, eating disorders like anorexia, which also get better with this. And more studies are coming. I'm aware of several that I've helped to get off the ground, and so we'll see more research coming out in the near future. My website, carnivore.diet, we've cataloged well over 1,000 testimonials, full interviews in many cases of people that have put all these diseases into full remission. It's quite impressive.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive. And from your experience and from your opinion, do you think this is because they get rid of everything else? Or do you think that's because they are eating the most nutrient-dense food in the world and also taking everything else, or some other thing that you've thought about over those 9 years?
Yeah, well, certainly removing a lot of the junk from the diet. I mean, a lot of the modern diet is filled with ingredients, particularly in the United States, where we have all these preservatives and emulsifiers and thickeners and shelf life stabilizers and things we don't even know what they really do, added to the diet with no testing. Honestly, it's basically this. It falls under this generally recognized as safe umbrella, which means the manufacturer said they think it's safe. Maybe they tested on a few rats and the rats didn't die, so now we're going to feed it to humans. So getting rid of all that stuff is undoubtedly helpful, but also a lot of people are suffering from nutritional deficiencies, and I think meat has, those nutrients in spade in general cases. So I think it's a combination of improving the overall diet quality, accessing full nutrition maybe for the first time, and then removing all these toxins, poisons, chemicals, and things like that that are in the food. So I think the combination of those things is really what, in many cases, is doing it.
Awesome. So going through that, it's important to understand, because many people think that, oh, well, no, you're just taking out junk food. But honestly, you're also getting many nutrients that even are not essential, like carnitine, taurine, creatine as well, right? On the diet, and that can help.
Yeah, certainly there are, like I said, there are conditionally essential nutrients, like you mentioned. They're only found in meat, like carnosine, like creatine, and to some extent carnitine and taurine and anserine. And interestingly, most people don't know this, but beef itself has something like 70,000 nutrients in it, 70,000 different named nutrients in there. The vast majority of which we don't even know what they do in the body yet. But it's been shown that beef has phytonutrients in there, because when the cow is out grazing and eating all the things that we can't, it's absorbing those nutrients. It shows up in its fat and its meat. And so we then get to eat that in a more bioavailable form, by the way. When it's bound to fiber and wrapped up in all these plant anti-nutrients and defense mechanisms, it makes it harder to access those nutrients. So meat is so incredibly full of nutrients that that's why people often feel so good when they consume it.
That is amazing. And I didn't know that, by the way. That's crazy to learn about. And one thing that I would love to get your view on is using your insight as an orthopedist. My aunt, for example, she's a cardiothoracic surgeon here in Brazil. Her shoulder was killing her. She couldn't do a surgery without taking painkillers. And then I started talking to her about the carnivore diet and how it could help her with inflammation and things like that. And after 3 weeks on the carnivore diet, her pain was like 85% gone. She was able to do the surgeries without taking painkillers. It's now completely gone after a couple of months. Have you thought about why these improvements happen on a carnivore diet after happening to, for example, all of your patients? Do you see it often?
Well, I think that, at least in part, a lot of the disease, as we talk about, all disease begins in the gut. And so a lot of people have dysbiosis or gut dysfunction in various types from the diet. And this seems to clear that up quite nicely. And when you are, when your gut permeability is altered, you allow for these inflammatory compounds to enter the body, and then that can cause inflammation throughout the body, whether it's the shoulder joints or the knee joints or the back or even the brain. So by fixing that, decreasing the inflammation, a lot of times we see joint pain go away. Additionally, and we know that high levels of insulin also can contribute to increased inflammation. And again, insulin often will decrease on a carnivore diet in many people. So there's a number of mechanisms out there by which this occurs. I mean, there's published papers looking at comparing, for instance, very low carb diets versus low fat diets when it comes to like knee osteoarthritis. And clearly the lower carb diet performed much better. So we know that lowering carbs often helps with inflammation in the joints. And that's one of the most common things I see. I was at a meeting in a little meeting last week, and there was about 100 people in attendance. And I asked them how many of them saw their joint pain get better when they went carnivore, and probably 2/3 of the room raised their hand. Now, these are people in their 50s and 60s. So clearly it has an impact on that. And as an orthopedic surgeon who dealt with arthritis his whole career, this is really, really interesting stuff.
And maybe that's because they lose weight as well. But I see people before losing weight saying that the pain improved, right? So it's not only about the weight, carrying the extra weight, it's about inflammation too. And that's very interesting. And talking about the weight, Dr. Baker, I've seen a lot of doctors in Brazil talking about the GLP-1 inhibitors as a treatment to increase weight loss. What is your take on the Ozempics, the Mounjaros? And do you think a carnivore diet by itself could be beneficial to people trying to lose weight that are overweight without taking the drugs? Or do you
do you have any other idea about that?
Well, so if we look at the mechanism by which these drugs work, GLP-1 is what's called an incretin hormone. It's secreted by our intestines, primarily in our ileum, in response to nutrition in the body. Normally, what happens is when nutrients make its way through the intestines and basically too much gets there, the body says slow things down because we need to absorb this stuff. And so meat, actually, there are studies that show that beef actually stimulates GLP-1 very nicely in the body. So a lot of people notice a natural sense of satiety when this occurs. And so the GLP-1 receptor agonists, which are similar to GLP-1, they act on the receptor. They're not exactly a GLP-1 like in the body, but they're similar. But it stays around in the body for days and days and days, whereas in the normal situation, it's only around for a few minutes. And so what happens is a lot of people have severe side effects. Their stomach stops emptying. They get gastroparesis. Sometimes they get intestinal obstructions or blockages. There's all kinds of other side effects. A lot of people lose an inordinate amount of lean mass, so they lose all their muscle, which is a real problem. Now, you can combat that with a lot of protein and weightlifting, but most patients aren't willing to do that. That's why they go on the drugs in the first place, because they tend to just want to take a pill. So you end up with all these potential long-term side effects. And the other thing is we know that those drugs only keep the weight off if you keep taking them the rest of your life. So if you want to take a pill for the rest of your life, then this is a route you might want to go.
Galera, um comunicado rapidinho aqui, vai durar 20 segundos, só queria falar se vocês têm vontade de se juntar à minha comunidade privada da Dieta Carnívora, onde todo mundo tem o mesmo objetivo, todo mundo tem a vontade de aprender, dúvidas são tiradas lá e você tá dentro de uma comunidade bem exclusiva, clica aqui no link da descrição. Tô fazendo uma promoção de tempo limitado, que se você entrar na minha comunidade privada hoje, você ganha 2 e-books pelo preço de 1 em cima disso. Let's go!
But for those of us who don't want to be on drugs for the rest of our life, obviously something like a carnivore diet might be just as good or perhaps even better for many people. I think that, for the average person that wants to lose a little bit of weight, there's way better ways to do that. You probably don't need to be on these drugs. And I know there's a lot of people that promote these, and there's a lot of money to be made by doing so, but it comes at a cost, like always. Like every weight loss drug that's ever been on the market, for the most part, has been pulled due to side effects. There are people that have maintained that this has caused death in a lot of patients. There's clearly lots of patients where severe side effects have been caused in the number of thousands upon thousands and thousands of people, and more will show up, as the years go by. So there's better ways to do it. I personally don't prescribe it. I'm not someone who is interested in that. I think there's, like I said, I think you have to, if you want to ultimately fix someone's obesity or other disease, you have to get to the root cause, which is, in many cases, food addiction, addiction to ultra-processed foods, and you got to get them to stop eating it. And by taking a drug to tell them to moderate it or limit it is often going to result in, like I said, basically being stuck on this drug for the rest of your life.
So is it your point of view that the people are addicted to food, and the carbs, the refined carbs, the ultra processed food, they are addictive, and telling people that they could just like eat once in a while the donut or the pizza or something like that, that's not ideal for people that want to get away from this vicious cycle, right? Of always eating again and then getting fat and then getting slim again. So would you say getting rid of the foods that might be addictive would be the best possible thing that a person could do in the beginning?
Yeah, I mean, I think for sure. I think these, the foods that are out there have been designed by food chemists and food scientists to be extremely addicting. I've actually talked to some of those people that say that their job was to make the food as addictive as possible. I mean, they know that going in, and they're good at it. I mean, these foods are, and this is why every year we have to have new foods come out with new flavors and new colors and new packaging to kind of keep people trying the new thing, because they know that, they have to do that to grow their audience and grow their customer base. Whereas real foods are not particularly addicting, but they're incredibly nourishing. And that's what we should really focus on.
Yeah, understandable. And let's say, for example, Dr. Baker, someone gets into the carnivore diet, but they are at that point outside of the curve that they do stall on the weight loss. What is your advice to those kind of people that want to see results but are not seeing initially the results in the carnivore diet regarding weight loss?
Well, like I said, diet is a crucial part of health. I don't believe you can be healthy on a really bad diet, over the long term. So I think you have to fix your diet at some point. Now, it's not the only thing that matters. I think sleep is incredibly, I would put sleep right up there with diet, quite honestly, or close to it. So if you're not focusing on good quality sleep, you're going to be compromised. The next thing I would look at is activity level. You should not be sedentary. If you have a job or a lifestyle where you spend most of your time still or sitting, that's a real problem. You have to address that. From there, we look into then, is it makes sense to do some sort of exercise or strength training? I think those things are important. Also, stress. Stress can be very damaging to our health, to our efforts to lose weight. Can lead to significant inflammation. And so dealing with stress and how you adapt to that. Now, some people have good coping mechanisms. Sometimes you just have to take yourself out of that stressful environment. If you can, not everybody can, but if you can't, then you have to be able to cope with it and mitigate it through different activities. I think light is important. I think our relationship with the sun, is important. So sleeping when it's dark, not staying up too late at night, looking at blue light and electronics, getting out in some sunshine when it's available, on a daily basis if possible. Folks in Brazil will have a good, that's, because they're close to the equator, have a lot more sunshine than a lot of places in the world. So that should be something that we should strive to, because a lot of us have been taught that the sun is harmful to us, and it's, we need to cover ourselves all the time and put sunscreen on. We shouldn't burn. We shouldn't get out there and get sunburned, but we should get, as much as possible, some daily frequent exposure to sunlight. Here I'm up near Seattle, Washington. So wintertime it's tough, but in the summer I'm out early in the morning, first thing in the morning, take my dogs for a nice walk out in the sunshine. And I honestly feel a lot better, when I'm able to do that. So much to the point that I consider moving somewhere closer to the warm weather, maybe down to Florida or something like that. So anyway, those are some things I think are important.
And it's great that you talked about this propaganda, right? Because that not only happens with the sun, with the sunlight, using sunscreen and stuff like that, but it also happens with like cholesterol and eating too much meat could cause cancer. So this propaganda is very strong, not only in the US, but in Brazil as well. So what do you say about that? What do you say to people that are listening to this propaganda but don't know what to do and who to believe?
Well, obviously sometimes things just on face are ridiculous. Sometimes it's just some common sense. If you look at who we are as a species, you're like, look, all throughout history, however long humans have been around, some people would argue it's been close to 3 million years rather. Some other people would say it's closer to Homo sapiens, 200, 300,000, or if you're sort of a fundamental Christian and you believe that humans have only around 6,000 years. Regardless, humans have always had a relationship outside in the sun. This thing, we've always eaten meat. We've always done these things, and that's who we are. Now, there's people in modern times that have a good marketing arm that want to tell you that, no, we should be eating factory-produced food. It's more efficient. It's better for us. Our researchers have taught us these things. And so I think some common sense, you can test things on yourself. You can literally, the nice thing, there's a lot of what we call gaslighting, where people try to convince you that something that's not true is actually true. It's very easy to take stock in your own health, particularly acutely. You literally can tell when you've lost weight. No one can fool you about that. You literally can tell when you hurt less. You literally can tell when your guts don't hurt, when your digestion is better. You literally can tell when you have more energy. You literally can tell when you have better mood. So no one can take that from you. So you can figure those things out. Now, when it comes to, oh, well, we think that if you do this or that, you're going to die early or you're going to get cancer or something like that. That's all very speculative. So I tend to take, when people start talking to me about they can tell me how to live longer or prevent me from ever getting disease. I tend to ignore those people because they don't really know. They've got something often to sell you, whether it's a product, a supplement. So I tend to be very skeptical when people start talking about longevity or, avoiding any kind of disease. Now, obviously it makes sense to be healthy, to be physically fit, to not be obese, to be capable, but that just makes sense on daily function and how you feel. So I think those things can line up. And I think probably, and I don't know for sure, but probably people that are generally healthier and generally more functional are going to probably have a longer life. Not always, but I mean, I think in general, I think that's what we should be striving for, a better quality of life. And if we can do that, I think the rest of things will work themselves out.
Yeah. So what I like to tell my followers is that nobody cares about your health other than yourself. You're the guy that cares the most about yourself than everyone else. So it's up to you to do your own research and see whatever works best for you. But yeah, the carnivore diet does make sense because, like we talked about, meat has all the nutrients. We don't have to rely on drugs most of the time. And you probably see, and I see my followers too, getting off a lot of drugs for diabetes, hypertension, and stuff like that. So, Dr. Baker, what I like to do right now is for the people here that decided to do the carnivore diet, that have studied and are decided, I would love to hear from you. What's your take on the first 2 weeks from the carnivore diet? Because I feel like this is the hardest for most people. Once they decided to take care of their health and maybe start a carnivore diet, they see that the first 2 weeks could be the hardest. What do you do with people in your practice when they start the carnivore diet?
Well, first of all, I have a discussion on why we're doing this in the first place. Why are you going to do what is the point of doing this? Is there something you want to overcome, some disease you want to put in remission? I think the real goal, irrespective, particularly when it comes to weight loss, people are like, well, I want to lose 20 pounds or something like that, or 10 kilos or whatever it is. I tell them that, look, this is a long-term solution. There's a lot of ways to lose weight. You could do any diet and lose weight, but I think with regard to long-term ability to maintain this, one, you have to enjoy what you eat. You have to enjoy the food. And you can't be hungry all the time. If you're hungry all the time, that's not going to be sustainable. You'll never be able to do that. So we have to look at, basically I say, let's find some carnivore foods that you can enjoy. Get some variety. Make it as diverse as possible within the framework of a carnivore diet. So that means if you tolerate dairy products, then great, you can add that in. If you tolerate eggs, great. If you tolerate different cuts of meat, there's thousands of meats that you can consume, and you can make them lots of different ways. You can learn how to be creative and enjoy it. You should be really trying to enjoy your meals. It should not be something that you dread. There's a lot of wonderful things you get to eat on a carnivore diet, so I would emphasize those things as much as within your capacity or your budget. Some people have a tighter budget than others. I think that the goal should really be to eat enough so that you don't want to eat the other things. And that's a really hard thing because people say, well, I think I'm going to miss chocolate cake or pasta or pizza or whatever it might be. But if you eat enough meat or animal products to full satiety, then you often find that you don't crave those things. And that can be very freeing because a lot of people say, well, it's very restrictive, but it's also very freeing at the same time. It's also very liberating because now you're not victim to all the cravings that you once had before for these foods that are in many cases extremely unhealthy. So that's how I kind of start people into this. And I tell people, don't think of it as a lifelong commitment. Just think of it as an intervention, 3 months, 6 months, whatever it might be. Fix your disease. And then at some point, whether you're strict carnivore or not, you're probably in a better place. You might find that a strict carnivore diet was not something you could do for the rest of your life, but you can do some version where you might add a few things in here and there and still be able to maintain quite good health. And so there's no room for dogmatism in this. I mean, there's room for strict definitions. I think when you say you're on a carnivore diet, doesn't mean you're eating honey and fruit and things like that. But at the same time, you may not need to be on a strict carnivore diet, and you could include those types of things. So I think it's something to realize that this is an intervention. It's a teaching experience. It's about learning what your body, how your body is, how it reacts to these things, because it can be such a tight elimination diet. You figure out what foods are difficult, because if you're eating hundreds of different types of foods and 10 of them are bothersome to you, you're never going to figure that out. I mean, it would take you a decade to start to figure these things out. So by going carnivore, it makes things really easy to figure things out. What's truly bothering you, how you feel, and in many cases, just not worrying about it and just enjoying the meals. It just simultaneously makes you healthier, which is kind of fun.
Yeah, that's great. That's great tips, because like you said before, right, it's not only about the diet. It could be about stress, it could be about sleep, it could be about sunlight and circadian rhythm, so many other things. And one thing that you mentioned, Dr. Baker, that I would love to talk about would be about honey and fruit. Do you feel like honey and fruit should be eaten by everyone, or do you feel like people like Paul Saladino that have a active lifestyle and they surf and they are out most of the day, it's more fit for them? But do you think that for most people, honey and fruit should work?
Well, I mean, it's certainly not required. I mean, there's people out there saying that you must include all these carbohydrates in your diet in order to be healthy, and I think that's patently false, at least for many, if not most people. Whether you decide to do that or not, I know there are people that have tried to reincorporate fruits, honeys, and things like that, and it's been disastrous. It's set all their problems back in motion. Sometimes it causes them to consume things they shouldn't. So there's that. I mean, but to say that some people can't include it into the diet would be false. I mean, I think there's certainly people that can and do, and I do think if you're very active, it makes more sense in that regard, because you might be able to counteract some of the negative issues that can occur with that. There are people that absolutely it's a bad idea for. I mean, there's people that, there's this sort of, now there's people talking about this sugar diet where they just consume nothing but fruit juice, honey, sugar, and some people are losing weight. And the reality is it's a protein restriction diet that's doing it. It's the complete lack of, or the very low protein amounts, which are driving that weight loss, only because your body thinks you're starving. I mean, when you're not consuming adequate amino acids, your body realizes it's starving and it starts to mobilize energy sources because it knows it's going through a famine. And that's not how we're supposed to live. Now, you can use it as a short-term weight loss hack, and you can do the same thing with just fat. In fact, I've done that, where I've just done only eating fat for a couple of days, and immediately I dropped 8 pounds in 3 days just by eating just fat. So I mean, it can work, but it's not a long term. If we look at, I don't know if you remember seeing kids from these third world countries where they're starving to death, and there's a condition called kwashiorkor. They get enough calories, but because they don't get enough protein, and particularly as kids have this high demand for growth, they become skeletal with these big swollen bellies and swollen feet and legs sometimes. It's that is a long-term consequence of a kind of a pure sugar diet would be that. Now, adults, we would look a little bit different than kids, but the same things are happening.
Got it. That's very interesting. And what's more interesting to me is that you lost 8 pounds in 3 days eating only fat.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I expected to happen. I mean, I'd done this years ago just to play with it, to test it. Not something I would ever do long term, but I was just to show the point. And I've got a video on YouTube coming out about this, talking about, the sugar diet works because it's low protein, basically. And any low protein diet will result in weight loss, but it comes with a price. I mean, eventually the price is going to be low lean mass. You're going to lose your muscle, lose a lot of the protein in your body, and we don't want to do that over the long term. So you can do it short term. You can do whatever you want. Now, if you prefer to eat sugar than fat, then maybe that's the right thing for you to do. But the sugar has, acutely some of the problems, particularly with, say, a diabetic or someone like a type 1 diabetic or an insulin dependent type 2 diabetic or poorly controlled diabetic. A sugar diet could potentially be a disaster. They could end up in the emergency room with diabetic ketoacidosis just because of the tremendously high blood glucose, as some of those people might see. They might see a blood glucose of 3, 4, 5, 600 milligrams per deciliter, which is, could be life-threatening in many cases. So you got to be cautious about some of these things.
Got it. And one question that I have that it always interests me when I hear about it is your thoughts about fruit in general. Do you think what do you think about fruit? What are your thoughts on fruit in general?
Well, again, I don't necessarily think that fruit is a problem for every person. I mean, there are people all around the world that eat fruit on a regular basis that are completely healthy. I do think that, obviously the modern fruit has changed from what fruit we would have eaten even 100 years ago. I mean, they're bigger, they're juicier, they're more sugar filled. I think fruit probably in much of historically was eaten very episodically. It's not always ripe. It's not always available. Where I live, there's only a little bit of fruit for a month or two in a year, a little bit of berries. And so I think that humans clearly would have eaten them and did eat them throughout time. I mean, we are opportunistic omnivores. If junk food would have grown on trees 1,000, 10,000 years ago, we would have eaten it. I guarantee it. I mean, that's just the way it is. But I think that, high amounts of fruit for many people are a real problem. And, whether it leads to obesity or liver issues, or if in the case of fruitarians, this dramatic loss of muscle mass, it's not, it's not something, again, we're talking about if somebody exclusively eats fruit versus an omnivorous mix. I think there are worse things you can eat than fruit for sure. Even fruit juice, and certainly a lot of the starch-based foods are probably worse for many people. But I like I said, I don't really consume any fruit of any kind outside of a rare occasion. I did a little experiment about a year and a half ago, where I ate some fruit for about a week to see what it would do to my cholesterol. And I didn't feel particularly good. It just made me have, kind of an upset stomach, basically, is what the result was. So I didn't enjoy it. I didn't really feel like it was making me any better. It didn't make me a better athlete or a stronger person. It just made my guts hurt. So I was like, no, thank you.
And for many people, that could, like you said, right, trigger that response to eating more and just having that hunger back that the carnivore diet can make it stop, right? And I wanted to talk about that, the other side of the spectrum, which is a lot of people know that in the carnivore diet it's the easiest diet possible. Just eat fatty meat until stuff tastes good. And I see a lot in my community and a lot in my followers that people tend to undereat on the carnivore diet a lot of times. Do you see that happening a lot? And what are the symptoms that you see in the people that tend to undereat? Sorry.
Yeah, undereating is very common. I think that, as we mentioned, we talked about at the beginning with the GLP-1 satiety aspect of a carnivore diet can be quite strong. A lot of people, because you don't get that profound hunger in your gut like we often see with a carb-based diet, where you just have to eat something. So sometimes the cues that we're hungry are not as noticeable. And so it could be simple as something as I'm a little fatigued or my mood is a little low. Well, perhaps you need to eat a little more. And I think what happens is that people will often say, I struggle with a carnivore diet, and it may just be you just weren't eating enough. And we see that not infrequently. We see that particularly in women in many cases, because they generally have been trained not to eat a lot of meat. That's kind of something that they have learned that they should avoid in many cases. And so what we see is fatigue. We see tiredness. We see coldness. We see, just generally just a general sense of not feeling well. And that often is related to not either eating enough or not absorbing enough. And again, we should talk about fat in a way, because some people, their body doesn't absorb fat well. Either through years of chronic gut health issues. And so even if they are eating enough fat, they don't absorb it. So they end up not obtaining enough nutrition. So a lot of times the fix for that is just to break the meals down into much smaller sizes. So they might have to eat more frequently. Most people on a carnivore diet will eat about twice a day, But for those people that are struggling with fat absorption or under eating, they might have to eat 3, 4, 5 times a day just to make sure they get enough, and then they can actually absorb it. So instead of the fat absorbed into our bloodstream, it ends up in the toilet, which is not doing us any good, because we want that fat. That's important for us to have energy.
Got it. So under eating means that those symptoms can appear, and a lot of people also cannot be absorbing fat too much. And what is when people start, in your point of view, what's the best proportion to start from? And do you see that there are people that work better with more protein, less fat, or vice versa?
Well, honestly, it can vary. I mean, most people, if we look at like fat by percentage of the calories in the diet, and remember, a fat gram gives you 9 grams of calories, and a protein gram gives you 4 calories. So if we look at that, most people will probably exist somewhere in about a 1-to-1 ratio. So 1 gram of protein per 1 gram of fat, to about a 2 gram to 1 ratio. So 2 grams of fat per 1 gram of protein. That's about 60 to about 80% fat, depending on which side you're on. So most people kind of find themselves in that range somewhere. Some conditions do better with a more ketogenic style ratio. I think certain mental health issues. Honestly, I think some women find themselves eating a little bit more fat, particularly, and it depends around their menstrual cycle, because some folks feel that during, let's say, the luteal phase of menstruation or the menstrual cycle, they might require a little bit more caloric input. So it can vary. I see, some people have different goals. Like athletes tend to maybe need a little more protein than non-athletes, and it doesn't matter distance athletes versus strength training athletes. I think the protein requirements go up regardless. So I think it depends, and you have to play with it a little bit. And some people find that weight loss can either be better on a higher protein version. Some people do better on weight loss with a higher fat version. So some of it has to be a little bit of experimentation. I can't necessarily predict for everybody who's going to do best with what. I've seen success in multiple, in different ways. So it's something that, needs to be figured out on the individual.
Got it. So at the end of the day, it's all about experimenting with their own bodies and understanding what works better for them, right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, you got to play with it a little bit, see how you feel, and find your way. And honestly, I mean, sometimes it changes too. Things change with time, so sometimes you have to make adjustments.
Got it. Dr. Baker, we're through the final stretch here. What I'd like to ask you in a couple of minutes is a couple of FAQs that I got from my private community. And before I dive into that, I'd like to know about your blood work after 8 years of carnivore. Mm-hmm. How is that right now? Do you feel fine? Are you having a heart attack? How are your arteries?
Well, I mean, like I said, I've done heart scans, cardiac, calcium scores on my heart, and I've got, basically no significant evidence of any heart disease based on those studies. Blood work, it changes every day. My cholesterol runs slightly high, not ridiculously high. My glucose, sometimes I'll wear CGM. Our glucose runs generally pretty low. In fact, right now I don't know if I can show this to you. I've got a CGM right now. It says my blood glucose is, I don't know if you can see,
less than 55.
Less than 55. So I should be dead according to a lot of people. No, but I generally run pretty low glucoses, and I'm obviously being able to function fine, give an interview. So I generally, like I said, I'm almost a decade into this, and I am, as someone who is 60, I am performing extremely high capacity as an athlete, which is what I really care about, because I have fun performing well, breaking world records, and doing stuff that 60-year-olds generally can't do or don't want to do or are unable to do, more likely. So so far so good. So 10 years in, that's a reasonable amount of time. And prior to that, I was keto for several years, so I probably got in low carb. So I've got, getting close to 15 years of a low carb diet, and I'm at the age where a lot of people are unhealthy and sick, and I am probably doing better than the vast majority of them.
Do you feel better now that you're 60 compared to when you were 50?
I do. And I mean, well, I would say, I should say, I started this stuff in my late 40s. So in my mid 40s, I felt a lot worse than I do now at almost 60. So I think that's important because, and I wasn't eating junk then. I just was, I just wasn't feeling as good. And so now my joints feel a lot better. My sleep is a lot better. My body composition is better. My gut is way better. I can tell you that. My gut symptoms are much better. So yeah, in general, and I'm very fortunate to be pushing 60 and still being able to function at a very, very high capacity. So I think the diet is a big part of that. It's not the only thing I do. I mean, I train consistently, and I do all the other, and I try to get good sleep, and I don't drink alcohol for any significant amount. So I mean, there's a lot of things that I do to allow this, and diet is certainly a part, but a very big and important part.
Yeah, and that's actually one of the questions that my private group wanted me to ask you is how can you build a strong body like yours? Because you built like a freaking giant, So how do you build a strong body in the carnivore diet?
Well, I mean, like any diet, and it doesn't really matter your diet, you have to be consistent in the gym. You have to put in the time and the effort. That is the biggest lever for body composition and building muscle, is you got to put the time in the gym. And I certainly have done that. And I've been lifting weights. I'm 58 since I was a 13-year-old kid, and I've never missed more than about a week. So for 45 years, I've been training consistently in the gym without taking any significant time off. Now I vary it up and I do different things, but that's one. Number one, be consistent and just keep going. Over time, you'll improve. I think that getting adequate protein is incredibly important. And I think that, if we look at, even any of the science out there shows that in order to build muscle, number one is training, number two is adequate protein, and number three is adequate calories. And if you do those things consistently over time, you will be able to put on muscle. And then it's just a matter of, if you want to be leaner, then it comes down to how you diet and what you consume and how much and that type of stuff. So, yeah, I mean, it's just consistency over time. And that's the hard thing, is that there's no shortcuts. There's no secret pills. I mean, yes, there are people that are taking drugs. I personally have no desire to take drugs. I don't take testosterone. I've never taken steroids. And so I don't have any desire to do those things. And so far, so good. Don't need them. Don't feel like I have any desire to. And certainly I'm at an age where a lot of men are on testosterone, which I just have no desire to do that.
Yeah, and it's a huge myth, right, that we need carbs to build muscle.
Yeah, we don't. Like I said, we need protein. We need training, protein, and calories. And if you get sufficient, that's all you need.
Got it. And Dr. Baker, my last question to finalize our interview is, how about supplements in the long term for the carnivore diet? Do you take any? And most people, do they need to take supplements in the long term in your practice?
Well, I personally don't take any supplements over the long term. Outside, I will say that I do sometimes consume electrolytes, only because I sweat a lot as I'm working out, and so I replace electrolytes. But so basically salt. But beyond that, I'm not taking any vitamin D, vitamin C, multivitamins, any of that stuff. Certainly not over a long term. Do I think most people need supplements? No, I think most people don't, provided they're eating an adequate diet. Are there some cases where supplements can be helpful for some people? Yeah, probably over the short term. There's some things that some people might benefit short term wise, but I'm in general, I don't sell any supplements. I'm not a supplement guy. I tend to be very skeptical of most of them. I think most of them are scams. Having said that, there are probably a few that some people might see some benefit with. But again, I tend to believe that human beings can thrive on a natural diet without supplements. I think that's what we've done for most of our existence. And these things are very cleverly marketed. They can show mechanistic changes, which people extrapolate into long-term claims, which I don't think are supportable. I think there's some short-term things. There are some supplements that have some decent literature behind them, like creatine, for one. Creatine as an athletic supplement has got pretty good data behind it. However, you get plenty of creatine when you eat meat, in my view. So I know there's people now doing ultra high doses of that, which I think is maybe questionable. Anyway, unfortunately, Antonio, I got to run and do another interview. So
yeah, that's for sure. Thank you so much, Dr. Baker, for being here. Really appreciate it. I'll see you.
All right, take care, man. Bye-bye.